Hello, everyone. Bonjour. Welcome to our conversation today on navigating the role of AI in the skills development ecosystem. My name is Elise Watkins, and I'm the manager of strategic initiatives at the Future Skills Center. So to walk us through our agenda for today's session, this will be a 90-minute webinar, and we'll be starting with some framing and introductory content to help shape our discussion on the role of AI in the skills development ecosystem. This will be followed up by a presentation on some of the research findings, as well as an in-the-field discussion and Q&A, which will address the latest research as well as success stories from FSC's funded projects. Then we will close our conversation with some final remarks. And to situate us today, I acknowledge that I'm currently on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, also known to some as Toronto. These lands are now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. The treaties that cover these territories include the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. As our work takes place across Turtle Island, we also acknowledge that we gather on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations who have cared for these lands and waters since time immemorial. We are grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and play on these lands and commit to learning about our shared histories and breathing life into the journey of reconciliation. I invite folks joining today's conversation to type in the chat, which lands are you joining from today? And we'll take a look. Thank you. A little bit of housekeeping. A reminder that today's session will be recorded and a copy will be made available to everyone who has registered in the following days. And we want to hear from you during this conversation. So please feel free to use the chat to comment and ask questions, and you'll see the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom panel there. And this will give us an opportunity to interact with you during these sessions. Again, this is a bilingual event, so if you want to select your audio feed, turn on the interpretation button located at the bottom of your screen, and that is the one that kind of looks like a globe. And please select either English or French. Thank you very much, everyone. We're going to kick us off now with a poll. How often do you use AI? We have a couple of options here. We have daily, weekly, monthly, never. I see a lot of dailies coming in, which is really exciting. And we know that AI is a broad umbrella of different, technologies and platforms. And certainly that could be generative AI, natural language processing, computer vision, reinforcement learning. So we're going to close the poll in just a few seconds. So if you get the chance to, please select when you use AI, and then we'll get a look at the results in just a moment. Great. Thank you so much. Can we see the results? Oh, wow. Okay. So 40% of you said that you use AI daily, 33% weekly, 18% monthly, and only 9% never. This is a great spread and a really good foundation for our conversation today. So we know that although still nascent in many ways, AI is already having a profound impact on most sectors of the economy and the world of work. We see that AI's impact on employment is complex. It can automate routine tasks, maybe potentially enhancing productivity and safety, but it may also disrupt job roles. And what does this look like? In the next decade, more than a quarter of Canadian jobs will be heavily disrupted by automation, and half will require a new mix of skills, even if the job title stays the same. And this doesn't necessarily mean that jobs will go away. It's actually just the opposite. And as we're seeing in recent headlines, the Canadian job market continues to exceed expectations in job creation. And we know the digital economy alone if we do this right, is expected to employ over 2 million workers by next year, 2025. And in fact, Canadian business executives believe that in the next 2 years, nearly 42%, so just under half, of the Canadian workforce will need to reskill to adapt to the growing presence of generative AI. And in a recent working paper from the IMF, there's a suggestion that AI will affect 40% of jobs globally. So, what have been the benefits of AI? We see that AI has the potential to stimulate innovation and productivity with tangible improvements across a wide range of economic activities. And we see that AI is already transforming workforce development systems and mechanisms in positive ways. We see that in improving skills matching, in enhancing skills recognition, facilitating learning. And we've seen how AI has begun to permeate education systems more, impacting teaching, learning, and research. So, some examples on the impact of artificial intelligence in FSC's funded projects include three that we've listed here. So, first, we're looking at AI training and professional certification with Evado. And the project aimed to address the current and future needs of the labor market for AI skills to provide a flexible and customized learning experience for participants. And this included offering 9 online courses on 6 AI themes with more than 3,000 people trained. Next, we look to the Mishner Institute, where there's training up to 5,000 healthcare professionals to effectively use AI in health practices, organizations, and systems. And we're very lucky today to have two of our panelists joining us from these two organizations, and we'll have an opportunity to dive more into this exciting and important work. And the third example here is highlighting Civic Action's Hire Next tool. And that is an artificial intelligence enabled job posting tool that was created to help employers create more accessible and inclusive job postings. And this was done with over 680 users across myriad industries. And this brings me to my next point. AI adoption should be a collaborative and inclusive process, engaging various stakeholders to address broader concerns about AI and technology. And we've seen from FSC's projects the emphasis on the need to consider employees' perspectives, not just the technical aspect, when implementing AI. We also see the importance of proper education and training to build user trust, which is essential for this AI adoption. And, related to the last project I just highlighted, it's really important to engage equity-seeking populations in creating training to foster trust as well as transparency. And this is important because it is more likely that workers will be replaced by other workers that hold these AI skills. And that's why it's imperative that we focus on upskilling people across Canada today. We see that AI is likely here to stay and will continue to evolve. And we see that AI is having this transformative effect on nearly every occupation and sector. We also see that there's a widespread application of AI, which means that almost no job is untouched by it and affecting all sectors from healthcare to finance. And so we really are seeing that disruption. Earlier I was talking about 40% of jobs being affected by AI globally. We also see programs focusing on reskilling and upskilling workers as being crucial, especially in sectors that are susceptible to automation. And the importance of digital skills and AI literacy is essential for the workforce. And really importantly, I want to leave you with this note about the responsible use of AI and ensuring that AI is safe, ethical, and contributes to the greater good. So thank you, merci beaucoup. I will now pass along the presentation to Vivian Lee, who is a senior economist from the dais, who is here to give our presentation of findings. Over to you, Vivian.
Thank you so much, Elise. Just let me share my slides. Sorry, give me 1 second. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Vivian Lee. I'm a senior economist at the dais at Toronto Metropolitan University. and I will be presenting findings from my report, The Skills Algorithm, which was released in November of last year on the digital skills demand across Canada, which was done in partnership with FSC. So a little bit of background around this piece of research is that it's a continuation of an earlier report done by the Brookfield Institute, which is now incorporated into the DAIS, and the report is called iHuman, which also analyzed the landscape of digital skills within Canada. And what we wanted to do with the skills algorithm was to provide an update on how the digital skills landscape has changed since then. So we looked at data from 2020 to mid-2023. And we wanted to have a specific lens on how COVID-19 impacted the way that workers operated and how businesses functioned during this time. And to give an update on digital skills demand and how to provide workforce developers, employers, and government with the tools necessary to upskill workers and to help them navigate this landscape of changing digital skills, especially with the rise of artificial intelligence impacting so many different jobs and sectors. So what we did was we took 9 million job postings from Vicinity Jobs, which is a labor market information and big data firm. And within each job posting, there was an associated occupational code, which is standardized by Statistics Canada, and also an array of skills linked to each job posting. And with each skill, it was classified as either digital or non-digital, and I'll get to how we did that in the next slide. And then with the universe of skills, we formed clusters or subclusters based on the number of interactions within the job postings. So if job postings contained 2 skills more frequently, then those skills were more likely to be in the same cluster or subcluster. So digital skill could be classified as either a technology skill within Vicinity Jobs already, so it was pre-grouped within the data, or it met a threshold of digital intensity based on the occupation that was associated with the job posting. So each occupation has a digital intensity score associated with it. So skills that often appeared in highly digitally intensive occupations were more likely to also be classified as highly digitally intensive. So overall skills clusters containing both digital and non-digital skills were formed. So we had 6 of them, and we see the universe of skills in the Vicinity Jobs data set, ranging from less digitally intensive on the left side to more digitally intensive on the right side. And then when we isolated for just digital skills itself, we saw 5 subclusters. And as you can see here, most of them kind of were more digitally intensive, and we can see them kind of cluster around the right end of the spectrum. So the first subcluster I wanted to talk about was the software and product development and data subcluster. And this contained many programming skills and skills that were used by digital and tech professionals, usually for occupational tasks such as creating digital products. So this includes artificial intelligence and machine learning skills and certain coding skills. And we can see that these skills tend to kind of cluster on the right end of the spectrum. With workforce digital skills, we see that it's not as digitally intensive as the software subcluster, and these skills tend to be used across the board by non-digital workers for many different types of occupational tasks that are not inherently digital or tech-based, so they don't really require too much of a technical background. This could be anything like Microsoft Word and Microsoft Office tools, data entry tools, and administrative tools. With the systems infrastructure subcluster, we see a lot of cybersecurity skills, and these tend to be used by IT professionals to manage technology platforms. So we see skills such as operating systems, firewall software, antivirus software being prevalent in this subcluster. And they tend to be pretty digitally intensive as well. So we see two new subclusters forming since the 2019 report. The first new subcluster that we saw was the industrial modeling and geospatial software subcluster. And digital skills in this subcluster tend to be used by engineers and architects to conceptualize physical spaces. So this could include software such as ArcGIS or computer-aided design software. And another new subcluster that we saw was the design and marketing subcluster, and this could include graphics and photo imaging software, communications platforms such as social media and blogs, music editing software, tracking analytics. So when we kind of look at the rise in content creation within the past couple of years, it's natural that we see a lot of these skills appearing more closely together within job postings, which kind of explains the rise in this subcluster. So looking at digital skills that grew in demand during COVID, we see remote working tools, no surprise there, and artificial intelligence skills growing in demand significantly. So on the lower end of digital intensity, we see remote working tools such as video conferencing software like Zoom, Teams, and online messaging software such as WhatsApp and Slack being highly demanded. And then on the higher end of digital intensity, we see artificial intelligence skills and coding skills being highly demanded as well, which kind of follows the tech hiring boom kind of mid-COVID. And then coming out of COVID, we see artificial intelligence tools and products such as large language models and image generators being really popular, which really drives the demand for, on the employer side, for workers that have these skills. So when we look at AI skills over time, month by month, within the last year, we see a large spike in AI skills demand on the employer side between June and July. So that's going from 0.6% of all job postings requiring one AI skill to 1.6% in July. And we see kind of a sustained demand for AI skills in the months following. And especially in the first 2 months of this year, we see AI skills appearing in 1.8% of all job postings. And this could include machine learning skills, deep learning, natural language processing skills. And in exciting news, Vicinity Jobs has added 81 new AI skills to the skills taxonomy. And they're going to start tracking it from March 2024 forward, which allows us to analyze more closely where particularly employers are demanding in terms of the types of AI skills. So thank you, everyone. I will be around later in the webinar to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Vivian, for that very informative presentation. I think there were a few moments where I was just in shock at seeing, the evolution of skills and the needs, especially even since mid last year. So thank you so much for that. And just a quick reminder to all folks on the call, if you would like to turn on the interpretation for today, please click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar, and you can either select English or French as we move into the next component. And next, I would like to invite Dr. Tricia Williams, our Director of Research, Evaluation, and Knowledge Mobilization at the Future Skills Center, to introduce today's panel. Thank you, Tricia.
Thanks so much, Elise. And gosh, Vivian, that was so exciting to see, like, you already had a sense of skill demand already from this year. So I'm really glad to see that Vicinity Jobs is tracking that in real time. I actually didn't know that before you just said that. So I'm thrilled to have a great panel join us today. Many of these are folks that thankfully I've been able to be in touch with already because I know that we are talking to them regularly, learning from them, and they've done some really exciting work, really piloting, I think, the understanding of AI skills and the application and how we can do more of it. And of course, this has all eyes on the work that these great organizations and leaders are doing. We have so many people on today just to learn about this because it is such a hot topic. So we are going to be joined by a few folks, including Arif Jetha, and I'll ask you all to introduce yourselves and your organizations. We also have Rajan Roy from Ivado, and we have David Wilger. I think I'm saying your name wrong, and I'm of Dutch descent. I should do better than this. But thank you so much to all of you for joining. I want to start with maybe Arif. Maybe if you don't mind introducing yourself, and I want to start with you particularly, maybe say a little bit about the initiative that you did with Future Skills. And I know that the work you're doing is so relevant to some of the things that Vivian just laid out. So I was like, this is a natural segue. So Arif, can you kick us off, and then we'll introduce the rest of the panel.
Sure. And welcome, everyone. And thanks for the opportunity to speak today on this research. Yeah, my name is Arif Jetha, and I'm an associate scientific director and scientist at the Toronto-based Institute for Work and Health. And we've been around for close to 3 decades. And as the name of our organization suggests, we focus on the relationship between work and health. So that includes how you work, your working conditions, your working arrangements, how that shapes your health and well-being. Our institute also focuses in on how having a health condition affects your ability to stay employed, be productive, and advance within the labor market. What we have known for many decades is that when there's a new digital change, a new transformation, it disrupts our working world. And that has implications for the health and well-being of the labor market. And that's kind of the direction that we are taking some of our research related to AI. So a good example of that is with the digital platform economy. What we know is that when these new jobs that were on our digital phones were implemented, they created a lot of productivity, a lot of economic benefits, but they also created really terrible working conditions. And oftentimes those working conditions were faced by some of the most vulnerable segments of our labor market. If we look forward to the automation of work, what we saw was that some of the lowest skilled workers, some of the most vulnerable workers, again, were most likely to have their jobs automated. So one of the questions we're starting to ask at the Institute is, as AI becomes more and more commonplace, how will it change our conditions, and how will it shape the health and well-being of the Canadian working population? So I'm going to give a bit of a teaser into what we've done, and then I'm going to pause, and then Tricia, I'll look to you to kind of ask some follow-up questions. But using an established analytical approach, we looked at the impact of machine learning on the Canadian labor market, and we did this using Canada's Labor Force Survey. What we found was that close to 2 million workers, Canadian workers, are in jobs that are going to be highly exposed to machine learning. And what this means is that a greater proportion of the job tasks within their day-to-day working life will be affected by machine learning. As we kind of dove into that a little bit more, what we highlighted was that there's kind of inequities that are existing amongst the Canadian working population. In particular, women workers, low-wage workers, and those in the lowest skilled jobs are most likely to be exposed to machine learning. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I think that that's something that we can debate as a group today, but I'll pause there, and happy to take some follow-up questions. I think you're muted.
Amateur, you know, I would like an AI solution for when you leave your mute button on. That's what we need AI to solve for. Thank you. Thank you, Arif. I mean, I was just saying to myself that I've really enjoyed reading your work, and I think the probing the deeper questions behind what Vivian just laid out for us about how the skill demands are shifting and thinking about that what's that means is really important. Thank you. We'll get back to follow-up questions. Next, I want to ask Rajan Roy to introduce himself. to discuss a little bit of the important work that Ivado is doing on this front as well, to think about how do we prepare more people to have the skills needed to contribute to AI development and utilization. So Rejan, do you mind introducing yourselves? Tell us a little bit about Ivado and what we've been able to do together through your partnership with FSC.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Régent Roy. I'm the manager for training and knowledge mobilization at Ivado. And I'll be mostly speaking French today. So I'll switch to French now.
Hello, I'm the Director of Training and Knowledge Mobilization at Ivado. Ivado is a consortium of university that is piloted by the University of Montreal in collaboration with University of Laval, McGill, HEC Montreal, which is a polytechnic university in Montreal, where we train engineers. Ivado received in 2023 a second subsidy, which CPREF. During the first subsidy, Ivado was focused on the technical development of AI. So we tried to develop better algorithms and so on. That was the first phase. The second phase, the second funding, we tried to develop AI that is a bit more robust, that resonates more, and also AI that is more responsible. Not only do we need to ensure that AI is more reasonable, robust, and so on, we also want the adoption of AI to be efficient and more responsible. So in the second phase of the project, it's called Apogée, a project led by Ivado. We are focused on the adoption question and the impact of AI on all of the spheres of society, especially on the labor force. So we are especially focused on the way that AI will be changing jobs, AI will be transforming the world of work, and especially the AI's impact to the multitudes of changes for organizational culture, for example, on processes that already exist within organizations. So we're focused on the changes that will be needed if we want organizations to fully take advantage of AI. And these changes requires better training for employees, but also students, and so on. And I could go further into that in a few minutes during the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rejan. And perfect segue for us to introduce David to talk about some of the adoption elements that you've been thinking about at Michener. So David, do you mind introducing yourself and tell a little bit about what you've been thinking about in the healthcare context?
Yeah, happy to do so, and thanks very much for having me and letting me represent the team. I'm David Wilger. I'm the Executive Director of Education Technology Innovation at University Health Network. I'm also a professor in the Department of Psychiatry in the Institute for Health Policy Management and Evaluation. And I had the opportunity to co-lead on behalf of my organization, the University Health Network, and the Michener Institute, which is a college that looks at how to train a number of health professions across the disciplines, including laboratory technicians, radiology technicians, and so on. And we partnered with the Vector Institute as well to put together an education program. And our program started in 2020, so a challenging time in healthcare. That is the focus of our work, is thinking about how to tackle the issue of artificial intelligence in healthcare from the perspective of education. And in 2019, a report came out from the Harvard Business Review that talked about how do you build an AI-enabled organization. And there were a number of different models in that report, and it's an excellent report, and it talks about centralized models and decentralized models and where to have the expertise. There was one common theme all the way through, and it was educate everyone. And we took that away as like, well, that's a pretty big challenge. How do you educate everyone? And in a healthcare setting, making sure that people have the right education is paramount. So we set out to do a couple of things. We set out our mantra was we're going to tackle the mindset, the skill set, and the tool set. So we had several different initiatives. In the mindset initiative, we engaged in a series of dialogues and symposium trying to get people to think about critically where AI fits within healthcare. And, in probably in 2020, this wasn't top of mind as we, in the last couple of years, and this thing you might have heard of, Chat GPT, it kind of changed the discourse. So through the project, things changed from us sort of pushing information to people really engaging us to say we need to know more. So the mindset kind of changed naturally through what was happening in the ecosystem. And then in the skill set category, we developed education programs for healthcare leaders as well as frontline clinicians. We had a general program for frontline clinicians, and then we created two specialty programs, one for the radiology and radiation sciences, and another one in the space of mental health. And then the final piece was how do we build really the skill set? And so we developed an innovation hub where we had mentors and mentees, and we brought them together to think about how do we solve this problem. So, where the discourse started was a real fear that somehow in healthcare AI was going to replace people's jobs. And the mantra that I think resonates well with a lot of people now, and I follow Dr. Mohammed Mandami on this, and he talks about the fact that AI is not going to replace people in healthcare, but people who use AI may replace those who don't use AI.
Well, hopefully we're going to have more AI users after this webinar.
That's the goal.
Who are willing to dive in. Super introductions. Thank you so much to all of you. I want to focus our maybe bring some dialogue into a few kind of core issues that we're seeing across some of our work and that we're hearing that are really pressing for the skills ecosystem that they're grappling with. So the first one has to do with, the basic skills. And there's a big focus, I think, right now on just delivering AI skills. We saw big announcements about funding investments from the federal government. So maybe let me start with you, Réjean. How do you think the AI training program that Ivado has developed is addressing, like, how are you seeing that demand for future skills? How are you, trying to respond to like the basic skill sets that you feel like people are needing? And can you tell us a little bit more about what are some of those skills that you're seeing?
I think that with partners such as the Future Skills Center, we're going to try and do three things. The first is that we obviously need people who have technical knowledge to develop AI within organizations. So they need to have hard skills, if you will, quote unquote, in AI. And these are skills that we acquire by following computer programs or in having a bachelor's in computer sciences or engineering, etc. So we need those skills and we'll continue needing them. And Canada is probably not as well equipped in highly specialized labor force. There was a study in 2002 from the States where there were different countries that were compared, and what we were able to see was that on the short term, Canada's position in terms of the offer, in terms of technical resources in AI, so people who are really at the service of AI, was relatively good. in the short term. It wasn't bad, but in the midterm or longer term, things didn't look quite as rosy. So other countries were better positioned than Canada was to make sure that at the mid and long term, we would have the necessary skills and specialists as, in the area. So at Ivado, we want to make sure that we have here in the province of Quebec, in Canada, the pool of necessary specialists, and that there be a solid number of people. So the amount of people that have the necessary skills that I mentioned before. So with the FSC, we've tried to do several things. The first thing we've tried to do was to come up with a tool that was accessible online that's called Autodiag, and that allows someone to assess their own technical AI skills, if you will. So if you use this tool, you'll probably end up being very depressed once you find out to what extent you don't have the necessary skills. Anyway, it was my experience, I can tell you that much. And it wasn't surprising, obviously. This tool is destined to specialists. So for those people who already have some amount of knowledge. So when we use this tool that was developed a few years now, that is still under the development as we speak, but so what happens when we use that tool is we come up with a good diagnosis of our strengths and weaknesses in terms of technical knowledge. So what we're trying to do now is to go over the questions that we'll be submitting, because in certain cases, some questions were way too specialized, and we had to make them somewhat more general in nature. So that was one aspect. In other cases, we'd like to add certain questions, questions that weren't there before, to take into account of the rapid evolution of the sector. Something else that we're trying to do is to match the results obtained by a person that uses Autodiag on the one hand, and the training opportunities that someone could avail themselves of. So if you realize that you're weak on the technical aspect, if you will, in a specific area, well, we'll be able to suggest certain targeted training programs that could lead you throughout the country to make sure that you answer this shortfall. Secondly, there were lots of classes given online on technical themes once again. Many classes available in French as well as in English. So these classes that have attracted somewhere in the whereabouts of 30,000 individuals. In many cases, these people didn't complete the entire course. That's one of the problems with these heavy loads. And in a small minority, a few made it to the very end and asked for a certain certification in order that they could be in the recommender system, if you will, if you look at the English class, where, in other words, yes, that they master the deep learning essentials, for instance, and that could be proven. And also they can do certain things in automatic knowledge acquiring in the sector of finances, etc. So, and then quickly, and we can come back to this, Tricia, if you will, afterwards, but we also came to realize that there were shortfalls in terms of project management expertise with AI. So we're finalizing a program to accredit those individuals that are called upon to manage projects in AI. So that's something that we also did with the Future Skills Center. I could talk about it later, if you will, more in depth. And another thing that I'll be able to come back to, well, there are all those people that have to call upon AI and have to do so efficiently. And we're at the very beginning of the curve at this point, right? We indicated so just a few minutes ago. David said so everybody needs to be trained. I was part of the writing up of a report for the Quebec government. Children need to be trained from kindergarten all the way up to, a very advanced age, 7 to 77, as they say, or 9 to 99. You take your pick. So there's a great deal of work to be done, and we're starting to think of how it is we can accomplish this work. Thank you.
I am just chuckling to myself, imagining a future skills program rolling out to retirement homes. But yes, what a fabulous point. Thanks for making that clear, Réjean, about the wide adoption. We're going to get to adoption. Absolutely. Arif, I know you've been thinking a lot about the occupations that have more exposure to machine learning, what that looks like. What are you thinking in terms when you think about the skill sets and the shifts that are happening in kind of skills requirements and components of work?
Yeah, so I think Rejan's comment was one that we have also identified in our research, which is no Canadian job is going to be untouched by AI. So I think that's a critical message that hopefully people can take with them as they move forward. We're all exposed to it in some way, shape, or form. And our jobs tend to be made up of multiple tasks, and at least a small subset of those tasks can then be kind of taken on by an AI tool, a machine learning tool, a deep learning tool. So, and I think the other kind of point to highlight is this is a moving target. As AI advances, as it becomes more intelligent, independent, fast, that's also going to result in an evolving job skills landscape that we should all be aware of. Like, this is not a static situation. It's evolving quickly and before our eyes. And as the technology advances, it's going to impact a different group of workers, a different set of occupations. And so I feel like in a year from now, if we were to have this exact same conversation, new themes would emerge that we ought to be tackling. So if we look into the research that we conducted in its current form and in its current use, some of the jobs that tend to be most kind of exposed to AI or machine learning and tend to be those that are still on the lower skilled ends, but they might require a bit more of data and prediction. So we're thinking about travel agents. We're thinking about folks working in financial services types of jobs. These jobs require processing of large amounts of data, and they require decision making and prediction. On the other hand, the jobs that might be less exposed to AI or other types of AI tools are those with unpredictable types of tasks. Those are physical types of tasks. So we're kind of seeing this kind of segmentation of the labor market uh, according to AI adoption. Now, I think one thing to highlight is that in the past, a lot of technologists would say that advancements in AI, they're going to affect maybe some of the more skilled jobs like accountants, lawyers, physicians, healthcare providers. And while that is the case and they are affecting kind of job tasks within those occupations, it still is the low skilled jobs, the low wage workers that are currently most kind of susceptible to having their jobs affected by AI. And to me, that's a low hanging fruit when it comes to job skills training. We need to make sure that groups that have been traditionally disadvantaged in our labor market are kind of offered job skills training, upskilling and reskilling opportunities so that they're not left behind in this AI revolution.
What a good point. And I want to get back to some of those equity dimensions for sure. But first, David, can you mention skill sets as being so fundamental to thinking about AI adoption in healthcare? Can you tell us a bit more about like what are those skill sets and maybe anything you have about the kinds of occupations that you were thinking about training to Arif's point? Like was there a range of occupations that you were looking at in terms of transmitting that skill set and mindset?
Yeah, excellent question. And we, in the beginning, divided the work into sort of two categories. One was thinking about our frontline clinicians, and I'll get into that in just a second. But we also recognized early on that it was important to make sure we trained our leaders, because we had to have both the decision makers and the frontline people doing the work sort of synchronized. So the leaders, we focused on a couple of skills. We focused on issues around decision making. How do you make decisions? How do you work with, for example, industry and other partners? How do you set up good governance? What does good governance look like? How do you pay attention to issues like cybersecurity and what needs to be in place? So really tailoring what's naturally a leadership role already and making sure that they have the literacy to make those decisions. So having the basic knowledge and then applying their sort of tools of the trade with that literacy was important. I think when we got to the clinicians, it was a different conversation. And where we started was what problem sets are we trying to solve? And we spend a lot of time concentrating on getting them to think about where there are a lot of problem areas in healthcare or areas where AI can be powerful. And so thinking about, the basic literacy and what are the various types of AI, but also what are the skills that clinicians need to know about how to build trust, how to co-create, how to have the vocabulary to talk to the teams that are required. And I think we've already heard from this call that AI is not an individual sport, it's a team sport. And part of what everybody needs to know is how to communicate with the other folks on the team. And so we spent a lot of time on that communication piece. And most importantly, giving our frontline clinicians real data sets, real problems to solve, and letting them practice and get comfortable so that they can understand what their roles are. In terms of when we got down to the skills, we opened up a mentorship opportunity where we let people bring in their projects, and then we brought in mentors to help them understand some of those problems. And so, some of the common issues are where do we get the data from? How do we navigate the data issues? How do we get the right people in the organization engaged? How do we get institutional approvals? So part of this is in the early on work is navigating the unknown, which is, in most industries difficult. In healthcare in particular, it is very, very challenging because we have a responsibility to do no harm. And so there's a culture of being relatively risk adverse in introducing these new tools.
Fascinating. Yeah, so many thoughts about that. But I noted that none of you mentioned prompt engineering, and I was part of an AI course myself last month, and they said, before too long, the AI will have gotten good enough that we won't need all this prompt engineering. So in some ways, these all the kind of advertisements for learn how to be a prompt engineer it's a moment in our AI evolution that is unlikely to kind of stand the test of time. So I concur with that. I want to turn to a next round of questions to kind of probe some of the things that you've already mentioned around inequity, some of the ethics of AI, and some of those things that maybe you're weighing as you're developing these initiatives. Because, I think the three of you kind of represent organizations that were kind of on the front end of probing the AI and skills questions and are still exploring them. So maybe help the audience kind of understand the thinking behind this. And I know Elise already went over, another project that FSC supported with Civic Action around a specific AI-enabled tool to look for bias in job postings. And sometimes when I talk about this example with different audiences, they're like, no, but AI perpetuates bias. And we're like, yeah, in this case, we were trying to do something to check human bias, right? So what are the potentials for AI, both to perpetuate bias, but also maybe to help mitigate some of the existing biases and inequities that we have? So Arif, I want to start with you. And I know that you've been thinking very deeply. It's in the mission of the Institute for Work and Health to think about equity issues with AI. So wondering your thoughts on both like where you're seeing problems, not to say there aren't any problems, but is there any world in which AI can actually be a tool for addressing some bias?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting set of questions. One, I want to highlight that we're still kind of early on. Like, I think all of us are really early in understanding what impact AI will have on different groups of workers. And in many cases, we won't know about the harms until they actually occur, which is a little bit scary, to be honest, because things are moving very quickly. Companies are adopting these tools very rapidly. And a lot of technology experts, AI experts are actually calling for a pause and a like a slowdown of the rapid development implementation of these tools. I think in its current phase, and this is emerging from our data, again, it's about the disadvantaged worker groups, those who have historically been left behind. And I think in its current evolution, we run the risk of AI kind of exacerbating existing labor market inequities. And so I think when we look at the labor market data, what we found is that there's certain groups that are more likely to be exposed to AI. But I think what's important to highlight, and I noted this early, is that we still don't know if you are exposed to AI within your jobs, is that going to have a harmful impact or is that going to be beneficial? So let's look at that a little bit more. In terms of its benefits, obviously, like AI can complement the work that you can do. It can free up time for high value activities. It can allow you to kind of take on the more human roles of your job. And that's very positive. And I think organizations and employers who are adopting AI really need to think about how to kind of best optimize AI and how to best optimize their human workers so that they're working in complement and augmenting one another. But I guess on the other hand of the storyline are the potential harms on workers and occupations. Job displacement, maybe losing some of your work hours because all of a sudden a bunch of your tasks can be performed by an automated AI system. These are all threats that we ought to be aware of. And that's why this conversation on job skills development is so important. And it's especially important for groups of workers who've been traditionally disadvantaged. At the Institute for Work and Health, we do a lot of research on persons with disabilities, persons of color, immigrant workers. We want to make sure that groups that in the past have been kind of forgotten when these new technologies have been implemented are actually at the forefront of this. And one last point I'll highlight is that we know there's a big gender divide in the Canadian labor market. It continues to show up in many ways. And our data shows that women are more likely to be exposed to AI. And I would actually like to challenge folks in the audience to maybe think about how that greater exposure to AI within the working lives of women can actually be used as a way to elevate and to address that existing gap that has existed. And maybe this is one solution to kind of leveling the playing field. So I think that's one way that I want to think about things moving forward.
Fascinating. I hadn't thought of, the specific gender dimension in that way before. David, can we turn to you next? I'm trying to mix it up a little bit, keep everyone on their toes. What are you seeing? I know there's a huge element regarding, you mentioned this already with trust and belief in, trusting that AI can actually improve patient outcomes. How did you feel like the organization and the staff involved in the training responded to AI as a potential tool for better health?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think it it sort of depends on the areas in which you're working, and so I think, for example, in a highly highly technical field like radiology, for example, where you have a lot of technicians, there was already an acceptance that this is where we're going, and that these tools had a role to play in the work that they're doing. I think when you get into more of the trusting and relationship kind of roles, like we see in mental health, there was a little bit more skepticism, and I think the mental health folks in particular that we work with really pushed us to say, we can implement some of these tools, but the organization has to be ready to do this. And there has to be systems levels issues. And one of the big things that people I think are rightfully skeptical about is the quality of data that exists within our system. And, if you look at some of at least in my field of education in the health professions, if you look at what's happened in the last 3 years, we've gone to having a little bit of evidence in the ecosystem and a few publications to just this huge ballooning of data, and it's almost like a rocket ship. We're going straight up in terms of the amount of data that's available to help guide us. But what's interesting is, where is that being generated? And it's mostly being generated in three areas. So North America, Europe, and Asia. And why is that? Because that's where that's where their data sets, that's where some of the knowledge. So if you look at this on a global scale, I think people are worried about what happens to global health in this environment, because we have a huge global inequity issue already, and we're going to have to tackle that. Different organizations have different levels of data, and that's going to create equity issues at the organizational level. And how do we pay attention to groups who maybe don't have as much resource? I work in an academic health sciences center. We have the ability to have a lot of resource. If you work, in a rural setting and you don't have that infrastructure, how do we support? And then we also engaged with our patients in this conversation. And we said to our patients, not how do you feel, but what do you think healthcare providers need to know, and how do they need to be prepared? And they talked about the knowledge and the skills, but they talked about the trust building and needing to being able to communicate to all the various stakeholders around what is happening. And I think that's a central role that people need to pay attention to. But they also said this to us, that there's a lot of bias that exists already in the way that work happens and the way that healthcare happens in particular. And patients were saying to us that maybe these tools can help clinicians be more reflective of the biases that they bring towards individual patients. And I thought that was a very powerful message that came out of this work. And I think clinicians respond to that and are paying attention to this very deeply. I will say that that prompt engineering is all the rage. I was just at a health conference, and there was a prompt engineering workshop, and people were hanging from the rafters. But I do think it's, a fad. It's like teaching people to use the old Microsoft paperclip. It's going to last a little while, and then it's going to be something that we don't talk about, next year at any conference, because we'll all be using it just like we use Google.
Great. Thanks, David. Réjean, similar question. What are you seeing in terms of, the potential risks or AI implications of AI in the workplaces that were addressed through what Ivado is doing? What are you hearing, or what's the conversation in Ivado around the ethical dimensions right now?
Well, the conversation with respect to risk is a conversation we have daily at Ivado. Our Apogee grant leads us to develop and to deploy more robust AI that is also more responsible. And more responsible, it means many things, right? It's not always properly defined. What does more responsible actually mean? It can mean, from an ethical point of view, it has to be non-sexist. It has to be progressist. If we speak of work, if it's introduced in the working environment, it's not going to be dismissing hundreds of thousands of individuals that will be jobless, nor will it remove responsibility from people who are working within organizations. They won't be demotivated. From an environmental point of view, what does it mean? With AI, we should be able to create by consuming a limited amount of resources or electricity. So being responsible is at the heart of the work that Ivado is conducting. Now, if we want to concentrate on the actual work, obviously we are very much concerned with the impacts of AI on the workforce. Ivado has implemented 10 research groups, if you will, in sectors such as health, environment, but there's also an axis, a research axis, where we're going to be taking a closer look to adoption. And this is going to lead us to think of those conditions that need to be met to make sure that AI is deployed in a responsible fashion within organizations, whether it be the private or the public sector. But it also means that we're going to be looking for, on this axis, we're going to seek to think of what should be done in order to make sure that the different elements of our society take advantage of AI and don't suffer from its more and more massive introduction into the system. So we're concerned with the development and the deployment of AI for and by the Aboriginals. We've been working on that very issue very specifically, and we've also started discussions with other stakeholders, Aboriginal stakeholders, to see what type of projects we could co-lead with them. And we've also gone forward with training programs with Aboriginal peoples. We're very much concerned with the question that was raised before, what place women hold in the AI sector. So there are specific actions and measures that will be taken soon, we hope, in that area. We want to make sure that the marginalized groups or individuals contribute to the development of the deployment, and the impact on those populations and not be a negative, quite the contrary, that they be positive.
So the responsibility questions, we directly take them on, but they're also transversal, meaning that each of the actions that we take, whether it be in research or training or knowledge mobilization, our work in partnership with other organizations, we always ensure that what we do is responsible. To ensure that we do things in a responsible manner, we offer training on responsibility, that question itself. In the MOOT, the courses online I spoke about earlier, we have a course that was actually a course that was developed with the FSC on ethical questions and bias in AI. So we have a course on that. I was saying earlier that we try to develop a certification program for AI managers, and we also include our DEI specialist to make sure that this program meets the expectation of the, let's say, the non-white person, and to make sure that it will not be penalizing marginalized groups or women, for example. So we're trying to educate the whole of the population, and we pay close attention to responsibility. And we try to really target marginalized groups. We have courses that are specially developed to target certain cohorts, certain populations. So this is the work at IVADO, but it's a work that needs to continue. It's not over. The work to be done is monumental. There's a lot to do.
Well, I thank you so much for that. I mean, I'm not surprised that each one of your organizations are thinking deeply about it, and I see a lot of questions coming in. This is certainly something that we can't checkbox it. We can't checkbox and say, you know, we're thinking about it, but it's the practice of thinking about the equity issues, thinking about the application that requires our constant interrogation of what this means. On that note, and I think you provided a beautiful segue, Réjean, to thinking about the adoption questions. I want to do a round where we're talking about adoption and how do we broaden the impacts of AI while also thinking about risks and potential negative impacts as well. Before we turn to a long list of questions coming in from the audience, so I'll remind everyone on the webinar, feel free to type in your questions for the panel. I'm just going to be ferrying them. I'll try to group them a little bit, but there's some really interesting comments in there that I want to read out. But before we turn to that, maybe let's start with you, David. Let's start with you on adoption. So lots of money going into AI, lots of attention. You know, we've seeded some pilots at Future Skills Center. We're very much thinking, how do we broaden the impacts of this? What are the kinds of interventions? What are the kind of policies? So I'm curious what your sense is. I know you're doing some work to, you know, integrate what you learned from the pilot you did with us into the kind of the wider missioner. What are the things you'd say needs to be done in other places? What are the kinds of policies or things? If somebody's listening, what's your takeaway? Or although I'm going to let you have your final work at the very end too, but like what are you seeing in terms of pathways to adoption?
Yeah, and I'll just start, and I should have started this from the beginning. I have to thank FSC for the partnership in this, and the foresight. You know, it was 4 years ago, I think very few people were talking about this. So, I think I'll frame my response a little bit in the notion of service design, and I think what we saw in the early days was a very demand. Uh, a supply side conversation that people with tools were coming in and saying, we have these tools, how can they help in healthcare environment? And that conversation needs to actually go both ways. And we need to have both a demand side and a supply side conversation of what is it that we want in our environments? What is that going to look like? And so where should we be focusing our energy in implementation? So we need to redesign a lot of processes, because when we introduce these tools just as a supply piece, we create a lot of friction. And in healthcare, we have to worry a lot about burning out our staff and creating a situation where our staff will just go elsewhere. And so we want to engage in those conversations around what does the future of healthcare look like and how can we implement these tools. We also have to use some drivers of some excellent evidence that are coming out, is that there are some things that AI does better at scale than humans do, and we need to make sure that we implement that so that our folks in Ontario and across Canada get the best possible care. So, you know, we know, for example, that screening, AI is very good at helping to assist in screening. So we need to bring in that evidence into the conversation and let um, our our communities really understand the impact and the value of where these tools can be used. I do think that in implementation, one of the biggest concerns is that we're going to do harm, and in harm in various ways, that we don't know what the technology is doing, that we disadvantage groups, that we disadvantage certain types of work. And so really having an equity frame to the implementation, for whether it's from the education or the actual implementation, is really critical in creating that dialogue. And how do you do that fundamentally? It's co-creating these solutions with all of the various groups. So that's something that we've tried to build into the education, is that now is the opportunity for folks to get educated, to participate in the conversation, and to educate others in the conversation, so that we can collectively build the future together in a way that will serve all equity deserving populations and will fit, so that we just redesign our processes. You can't take an algorithm and just plop it into a clinical context. We have to redesign the service and the way that we're actually doing the work. And if we do those things in a co-created way, I think we have a really good chance of having a successful transformation of our healthcare system. I'll just say this, the reality is that we know that our system as designed now will not meet the needs of our citizens. And so it actually is a moral imperative that we think about how do we redesign the services using these tools. And it's something we must do, but we need to do it in an inclusive way.
I mean, so well said. And I would add, you know, in addition to the moral imperative that you mentioned, very real, we also have a burning economic imperative, given kind of productivity numbers that we continue to see. I'm going to channel Vivian, the economist, and we'll get her to come back for the panel discussion as well, to say like this is so pressing on so many fronts for Canada to really think this through in a careful way. Arif, I want to turn to you next before wrapping up with Réjean and turning to some questions. David just brought in the piece of, co-creation, equity, inclusion. And one of the things I think we talk about a lot at Future Skills is especially employer adoption, where, one of the groups we pay a lot of attention to is employers and small and medium enterprises, and making sure that skills is not simply a supply side conversation, as you said, David. But how do we do that in a way that, we adopt AI technology in a way that prioritizes worker well-being and equity? Is there a world in which we can do both?
Yeah, so that's exactly what we're trying to understand at the Institute for Work and Health. And I'll tell you, there's a number of burning issues that we really just don't have answers to just yet. But we're kind of in the midst of trying to figure out how to advise employers and policymakers and other groups on how to kind of address some of these. So as we know, like where you work and how you work has a significant impact on your health, well-being, quality of life. We learned this during the COVID-19 pandemic. Those of us who had jobs that allowed us to work from home in a hybrid environment, we had a totally different experience from those who were considered essential workers or required to go to physical work sites. And this has kind of been a trend that's kind of existed for as long as we've had our kind of a modern economic landscape. And so the question is like, how will AI further kind of change working conditions? And we could think about it in several ways. The first is like the psychosocial work environment. Like, how will it be for a worker to work alongside now a digital device that is dictating your actions or constantly monitoring you? You can imagine it's obviously going to be quite a bit of a source of stress. It'll change the way you feel about going to work on a day-to-day basis. And there's been a number of case studies which have documented this, but we're still kind of trying to understand this evidence a bit more. The physical work environment, if you're working alongside like a very intelligent cobot who is more efficient and able to move heavy items in a way that maybe you can't, will you feel performance pressures? Will you feel like you need to keep up? Will you kind of exert your energy in ways that maybe you probably wouldn't have if you weren't working alongside that? And kind of coupled with this, I think there's even more like fundamental questions that we have to start thinking about is like, what is the role of human workers in our labor market? And like with the adoption of these more intelligent machines, what role do humans play, and how can we create social safety nets, training landscapes? Just like there's a system of issues that we need to start thinking about, and we should be doing that now so that folks aren't left behind as things change and as they change rapidly.
Oh, such a good set of issues. And Réjean, can you tell us you already mentioned some of this, of what you see in terms of the conditions that are necessary for wider adoption. I think we're hearing from David and Arif that it's not just training individuals alone is going to help us reimagine our systems, right? Training is part of it, skills is part of it. What else? What are the kinds of things that you're thinking about Ivado in terms of driving that adoption and reimagining our whole kind of labor system?
Okay, I'll start first to still talk about training. A big challenge that we foresee is training the trainers. We want to train everybody, like I said, the younger ones and the less young ones, but we don't have the necessary people to train the trainers. We'll need models for training the trainer to be able to truly do it to scale. If we want to train 40 million Canadians, at the end of the day, we can only do it by training students who will be training other people, or to train innovation specialists who will then train their counterparts, or doctors who will train other doctors. So that's the first thing. Secondly, still related to training, potentially, we want to train people, but oftentimes we don't have a good idea of the entirety of the skills that this person should should have in order to be good adopters of AI. We need references. What skills are needed, for example, in healthcare to be a nurse that can fully take advantage of AI, for example. Same thing for the finance industry. So we need these skills referentials. Most of the time, we don't have access to this skill profile reference. That's a gap. Third issue is we want to stimulate the adoption, if you will. Here, it's true here, just like elsewhere, but we need success stories. I would say that currently the discourse on AI is often goes like this. It's often pessimistic or negative, and oftentimes for good reason. But we also need success stories, companies, organizations that successfully adopted AI. We have a few of these stories, but even at Ivado, we deal with so many businesses on the daily. They're very few. At the Canadian level, we need to collect proactively these stories and communicate them. We need to document also best practices that should be in place in organization in order to ensure responsible and efficient of AI deployment. These practices are currently not codified. So when we go to a company and we say, you should adopt AI, well, I said it earlier, they'll need to completely transform their strategies, their business processes. How can they do that? The solution is not very clear, and it's especially hard for SMEs to do that transformation, that pivot, because they can't afford to pay for these like expensive consultants. So we need to give the tools for these organizations to do things in a responsible and efficient way. I will stop here, but I could go on longer.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more that, reinventing it really echoes what David was saying about reinventing process. This is not simply kind of recreating the same things in an AI systems. That's great. And the kinds of systemic reimagination that we need. And therein lies the opportunity, right? To think about what can be transformed. Thank you so much to all of you. We are going to take our last 10, 15 minutes with some questions. And I think we're going to bring Vivian back to the front stage too, because I think there's some questions coming in as well about the research she was able to share at the outset. We have to start with we have to listen to the audience here and say, everyone wants to know, what is the gender story? Arif, I think there's at least 3 or 4 questions coming in there. So can you explain more what you mean by differential gender impacts? I don't know I know I've seen your slide too. If it's handy, we can pull it up, but
you know what, I won't bring up the slides, but maybe I can talk you through this a bit more to provide a bit more context to that finding. So as mentioned, we examined Canada's labor force survey, which is a population level data set of Canada's workers. We then took each and every Canadian occupation and we scored it. And we used a scoring rubric that was designed in the United States, and we were able to kind of map it onto Canadian occupations. And we were able to score each Canadian occupation according to the proportion of job tasks that can be hypothetically performed by machine learning. And what we found was that there were certain certain occupations that were more exposed to machine learning than others. And when we kind of looked at who was working in those types of jobs, what we found was that women were highly concentrated in the jobs that were most exposed to machine learning. And I'll give you an example of some of the occupations that kind of scored highest on our list: record management technicians, travel counselors, human resource and recruitment officers, accounting clerks, executive assistants. And so based on what the data is showing is that perhaps women are more likely to be working in those types of jobs, and as a result might be more likely to be exposed to AI. And again, this is not a good news story or a bad news story. What it means is that women have a greater likelihood of working alongside AI, and we might be able to think about how to complement the role and the work that these folks are doing so that they're able to kind of meet their productivity goals, or maybe able to leverage AI to be more creative within their jobs, or kind of take on the more human roles of their work. So that's kind of a brief explanation of some of these findings, but I'm happy to kind of dive into this a bit more if folks are interested.
No, that's very helpful, I think, and again, very interesting findings. I want to turn to the next question that I popped in for our hosts and panelists, which is around how much you think workforce and employers are underprepared, or do you think the workforce is underprepared for AI and digital transformations with regards to AI skills, or do you think employers are still generally transitioning into the AI shift? At which rate will one outrun the other? How do we make sure it's an even race? I hope it's not a competition, but rather a mutually synergistic. Réjean, I wonder, given all of the employers that you're working with at Ivado, what are you seeing in terms of worker interest in AI skills, employers? Like, how is that shaping out? What's your sense of it? I realize that you are talking to the employers who want AI training, so it's probably a biased sample. But what's your sense of this?
Well, to answer your question, perhaps I can give you a specific example. We're currently working with the Ministère de l'Éducation du Québec. So obviously, who's very much concerned with the arrival of AI and what it means for the actual ministry, the work of the the actual workers, civil servants, etc., but everybody involved in the schools, school commission, school boards, etc., and the different changes that will have to be made. Before, you were asking if employers were more preoccupied than employees. Well, with this specific example, I could say that the employers are just as concerned as employees. We organize all sorts of colloquiums. We're drawing up a training program, and I would say that the level of enthusiasm is very high. Everybody is very much concerned with the generative AI, the positive and negative impacts. I would have a tendency to say that employers don't really know what the arrival of this generative AI means in terms of their day-to-day business, the impact it can have on the reputation of their organization, on the different strategies that organizations can implement, and on the employee side of things. As a rule, I would say that yes, we're concerned with the eventual impacts of the of generative AI. Even if employers are very curious, and even if everybody's saying, yes, this could help me do my work, etc., they try and use tools such as ChatGPT, but they do it in secret because the employer is discouraging their efforts, etc. So it's going to take a great deal of training, whether it be on the employer or employee side of things. It's also going to require, as far as I'm concerned, a dialogue between both, right? In a report that was submitted to the Quebec government, the Conseil de l'Innovation indicated that to make sure that AI has positive impacts on the work environment, that the negative impacts be lesser, there'll have to be multi-partite groups. Unions will have to talk with employers. Employees will have to take part into the conversation. Everybody will have to work together, collaborate. Otherwise, we won't be able to uh, develop and deploy that responsible AI. And this responsible AI should also help with the increasing of our productivity, which is a huge issue in and of itself.
Yeah, that I couldn't agree more, that we're going to need all sorts of partnerships. And I think those comments were echoed by David and Arif as well. I want to take another question that actually loops back to the information that you presented at the outset, Vivian, around job postings and some of the trends you're seeing. And then I think maybe we might have time for one more thing, or just do a round of closing remarks, like final thoughts that have come to your mind during the thought of this before we wrap up, and thank everyone for their time. But Vivian, can you tell us that, like, based on what you're seeing in both digital and non-digital job posting, do you think the ability to use certain AI tools and having AI skills, is this going to be the new norm in future job descriptions? Like, is that the trend line that we're just going to see this, or what are you expecting to see in your economist crystal ball that you have around job postings that are coming out? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I would imagine so. As AI becomes more ubiquitous in the labor market and our economy at large, I think we're already seeing that kind of spike upwards, like as I showed in my presentation, that kind of large uptick over the past year. And I can imagine as Vicinity Jobs starts to kind of collect more data and start to distinguish AI skills that are for developing AI and for using AI to complement existing activities in the workplace, that we will start to see some of those skills within kind of more the workforce digital skills, distinguishing from the software and product development digital skills become a little bit more clear. So I would imagine it would start to become more of a new norm within the labor market.
Great. There's a lot of requests for links to, a lot of you are mentioning tools, resources, reports. People are hungry to learn more, which is great. I love seeing that hunger for learning. So just, I know that our communications team has been popping in different links to the Future Skills site. And I'm sure that they will be sending out an information package afterwards, and we can include any links that the panelists have available, including to your own websites and any materials you have there as well. We exist to share this information, right? We are the recipient of funds and investments from the federal government, from various provincial partners, that we're working with in many provinces. So we're very much of the view that this needs to be shared. Last final thoughts, minute each. What's on your mind as you're walking away? David, let's start with you.
I'm happy to start. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in the conversation. What I take away from this conversation, and I think is true, is now is the time to really talk about not just responsible use of AI or equitable use, but a values-based framework for AI. And what do we truly value, and what is the role of this tool set in making that happen? And in healthcare, we're trying to elevate the conversation of digital compassion and compassionate use of AI to say that we need a compassionate environment and to put compassionate care at the top of the list. And so where does AI fit in that conversation? And how do we make choices based on those values? And I think that's going to require an elevated notion of literacy so that we can actually make the right choices. And we have to be evidence-based, and I appreciate the opportunity from Future Skills to put that evidence in. We need to really contribute to high-quality evidence. Finally, I'll just say I think we need to reimagine not only the services, but what team means. And one of the takeaways from our project was, this notion of mentoring and coaching on one-to-one is in the world of AI is no longer going to work. We need to train many to many, because the knowledge that is required is so inter and multidisciplinary, and it changes so fast. So a couple of thoughts to leave you with.
Thank you so much. Vivian, anything that struck you during this?
Yeah, as AI skills become more prevalent in the workplace, and with the speed in which it's hitting us, I think it really drives home the point that we really need to be prepared and need kind of like an all hands on deck approach to equipping the workforce with the skills necessary to kind of future-proof against some of these impacts that AI might have on the workplace.
Thank you. Réjean, any last thoughts?
When we speak of adoption of AI, we often treat it as a technical issue, whereas it's a social, organizational, societal issue, which means that organizations that will want to maximize things, and I'm citing Eric Richardson a few years ago, for each dollar invested in technology, they will have to invest 9 or 10 in training, changing processes, changing culture, etc., etc. I don't think we're always well prepared in front of this reality. We concentrate on the $1 and we forget the 9 or 10 that need to follow. We're going to have to make huge efforts if we want to do this successfully, embrace AI. And we have to also understand that first and foremost, it's a non-technical issue. Very important.
Oh, what a great point. I couldn't agree more. Arif, you get the last word.
Yeah, I'll keep this short, and I just want to highlight that what we know from past digital transformations is, again, that the most vulnerable groups tend to be left behind, disadvantaged. They tend to kind of bear the negative brunt of any sort of change. And I think this conversation is critical because we want to make sure that AI adoption, AI usage is not only going to benefit a select few and further kind of widen this income gap, this social gap that we currently have, and we need to think about how job skills and other sort of investments in infrastructure will level the playing field, will make things more equitable across the Canadian working population.
Thank you. Over to you, Elise. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, so much. Thank you to our esteemed panelists and presenters. The timeliness and urgency of this conversation was really felt in the important insights and learnings that you shared. And thank you to all of our participants today for joining our call. I see some questions coming in the chat. There will be a full recording of this webinar available in the coming days, so check your inboxes for more information. And we kindly ask that if you could take a few moments after today's webinar to fill out the survey. We would love to hear your thoughts and your feedback on today's session. So thank you all so much and have a great rest of your day.